think we can jump into it. So, Assalamu alaikum, everyone. This is the Career Crew. The idea here is that it's a very casual panel based on the topic of virtual internships versus in-person internships. Not just internships, basically any job at all. Because I know a whole lot of you, basically, because of the last situation the last couple of years, you've only worked virtually. And a lot of people have questions regarding corporate culture, professionalism, how to conduct themselves in the workplace. So we're here basically to try to answer all your questions as much as possible. So I guess just before we jump into it, just brief introductions of your panel. My name is Hafid Wadi. I'm a software engineer. I'm currently working at Optum. Currently, I'm working virtually at Optum. I did intern with them 3 times before this, once in 2019 in person, once in 2020 virtually, and once in the fall of 2020 also virtually. I also worked for a startup virtually around that time, and I've worked previously in person at a minimum wage job, as well as several smaller things beforehand. So I kind of run the gauntlet of in-person and virtual.
Hello everyone, my name is Noura Mustafa. I'm an R&D engineer right now at Ethicon, which is a part of Johnson & Johnson. I previously worked at Ethicon. In 2019, I did in-person co-op in supply chain. And then in 2020, I did an R&D co-op. So I had kind of my first half of that was in person, and then the rest of it was virtual. And I've been there for the past 1.5 years. And I'm kind of continuing my role now. It's full-time in that R&D group. So I also have kind of like the in-person and virtual experience as well in a, I guess, like Fortune 500 company.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. So my name is Hidayah Frage. I worked as an intern for CARE New Jersey last fall semester. And I work part-time as an administrative assistant with a construction company as well. And I've been doing that for a couple of years. Both of them are kind of in person, and one of them is kind of on my own time as well. So I have a fair mix of both, I would say. So.
All right, so the way this panel is going to work is we're going to basically, ideally, we want questions from you guys. What questions do you have about in-person work versus virtual work? What we're going to do is, ideally, anyone who wants to speak their question will take precedence. If you don't want to speak, you can put it in the chat and we'll take it from there. And if there are no questions, we do have a set of questions we polled previously in case people can come up with them on the spot. Now, I guess to start us off, and naturally, if anyone has something they want to add, that's not exactly a question, an experience they want to share, absolutely unmute and share it as well. Your experiences are definitely warranted. Afnan, you have your hand up?
Yeah, assalamu alaikum. So I guess one question I had is for you guys. I know this might be a little different for each of you, but what specific pros and cons can you guys name for like working remotely and then working in person? And which one do you like better, I guess, since you have experience with both?
So for me, what I found was, and keep in mind, I work as a software engineer. This is a field that basically thrived virtually. This is a field that we discovered we didn't really need to be in person to do. It was actually more efficient. Meetings are actually easier to hold virtually because everyone can attend and you can share your screen easier. So what we found was it streamlined the process significantly. It made things easier and people were able to do it from home. They were much more relaxed. They were much more comfortable, much more happy. I personally got a huge amount of rest because of it, because I would have like a 1 to 2 hour commute one way every day, and double that going forward and back. So it was a huge relief to work from home because I could just roll out of bed, jump on my computer at 9 versus get up at like 5, drive for 2 hours, and then have to leave like at 6:30, get home in the middle, like late, and then be exhausted the entire time. The one con I did find is that it is harder to network significantly. And I'm someone who hates networking, but I have to do it, so I don't like commit like company suicide. But it is much harder to form a relationship with someone virtually because when you're in person, you're like right there. You can crack a joke, you can talk to them. Virtually, you almost feel like when you contact them, you need to have a reason for it. When you hit someone up, like, all right, I need your help with this or whatnot. It's not as casual, and that's the con I found for working virtually. But all in all, I still prefer virtual up till now.
Yeah, I would totally echo that about like the networking. That was something that's much harder virtually. In person, you could just walk up to someone's desk, or even when you're like making, appointments with people to meet with them in person, it's just the conversation is so much more casual. You're sitting virtually, you're kind of like looking at each other through a screen. You're not really picking up like all the cues that you would normally pick up like in person. It's definitely networking is a big thing, a big pro of working in person. Something that's really nice about working online, I think, is that people are much more prompt to meetings. And so they actually like last the allotted time. In person, people are walking to their meetings and sometimes, they stop and chat with someone or whatever it is. And so there's always that lag. Every meeting was always like started 10 minutes later, and it just always like cascaded. So that's something that was really nice with virtual. And then of course, all the other things that Hafid said about like, just like the efficiency. One other pro of working in person though that I had personally like in R&D was I got to actually like work in the labs. When we switched to virtual, I kind of dropped off some of the projects that were lab based just because it just wasn't practical for me to go in the beginning. And then now my kind of direction of of what I work in isn't lab based at all. So that was something I guess that I lost because of the switch to online.
No, I got to agree wholeheartedly. It was a little difficult in the beginning. I think when I first got the internship, when we started, everything was virtual. So it was a little awkward because I didn't have that formal introduction with my boss. And I was like, I'm not sure how I should address you. Like, how's the environment when we're actually going to be sitting in person? And I was really nervous on how I should be, like the exact way that I should be speaking. You never get that connection that you would get with a person if you are actually working in an open space. So when we finally moved to in person, I finally got to know what he's like, what the rest of the crew was like, how everyone kind of operated together. And I felt like I formed more of a bond than I would have 100% if it wasn't online. One of the people actually that was interning at the time as well could not come at all. And I never really formed any type of relationship with him, like at all. Like I never had a conversation. If I needed a question, I would kind of turn to someone else. So I kind of missed out on that opportunity. We would talk if there were meetings, but nothing outside of that, no like actual conversation. So I think that's a big thing that you miss the connection with people, I think, that you would get in person. But I think it's made it a lot more efficient to get a lot of work done. There was always stuff that needed to be done like immediately. Google Docs was always up and running as we're doing the meeting, and it was updated like really, really quick. So that was wonderful, but I think I missed the human feel. I think that's a really good plus.
Yeah, and like kind of to add to that, like inshallah, if you guys like get in-person internships or jobs, like the value of like going out with your coworkers for lunch, like where you really make the connections of them as like human beings, not just like, hey, I have this like deliverable, please like hand it in or whatever it is, it makes such a huge difference.
Afnan, you had a addendum to that?
Yeah, first of all, thanks a lot for answering the question. That was really insightful. I also had another follow-up question, which was, what do you see as like the future of, I guess, remote work? Because, the whole reason everything went remote was because of the pandemic. And now since that's, near its conclusion, at least in America, I guess most people are gonna be going back in person. But do you think that remote work as a whole, like with some things of it will like, what do you think will change, I guess, in the workspace with so much remote work?
So I feel like that's going to differ wildly between different industries. So for like the software industry and more like technology based, I feel like they'll start transitioning more towards remote. Not entirely, because people have a hard time letting go of the old habits. Even if it's proven to work better, they're still going to want to be in person. But I do feel like, because my company, for example, they're going forward, they're transitioning into a half-half model. So around 2 days at home, 3 days in the workplace, and that differs from team to team. So I feel like other industries, some industries have to be in person, like they have construction and whatnot. You can't really do that virtually yet. Once the software industry makes the robots, then maybe, but not yet. But that's coming up, I think. But rather, so some industries I feel can but won't, just because old habits die hard.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think that people have started to really see the value of working from home. You really don't need to be in the office for a lot of types of jobs. And like J&J is kind of doing the exact same thing. They're calling it like a flex program where you can flexibly work. You work 3 days in the office and you have to take mandatory 2 days from home, which is like pretty awesome that now like it's becoming a thing. Like they understand that you can work from home and there's really no reason to come to the office. But there's always going to be like some kind of bureaucracy to it. They're renting these office spaces and they have these buildings that they're paying for. So I don't think it's ever going to be like 100%. You don't have to come in person unless you're in some sort of like startup. I've heard that there are like companies where they don't have like a centralized office space. They kind of just like work wherever, like they rent out either like restaurants or something if they need to meet in person, but a lot of it's virtual. So there are like companies like that already as like an option.
Yeah, no, I've heard about that as well. I think it's really interesting. Like it's definitely depending on the profession and the type of job that you would be working in. So like on the construction side, 100% nothing can really work unless you're in person and you're sitting there and you're kind of taking all of the estimates down, you're working with the people directly. A lot of it's phone call based anyway, but outside of that, you have to go see the property. You have to go in person, you have to talk to these people. But I think a lot of different jobs are going to be a hybrid mix. I think a lot of people have seen the benefits and they outweigh the negatives. I've even heard in New York, there's a lot of companies that are changing to almost completely either virtual or a hybrid mix because it's going to save a lot of people in terms of commuting. So they're trying to offer more incentives to get newer and fresher minds onto their groups. And so that's one of the things that they're trying to put out there. So I definitely think it's going to be a hybrid mix for a lot of companies.
All right. There is here a question regarding practicality of how actual work in person works. And the question is, do you work the full 8 hours other than lunch break? And what I understand from this is basically, are you just like a machine at your desk the entire time? And that's a conception a lot of people have. I guess it also, different company cultures are different. So I'm sure everyone's heard the horror stories that Amazon doesn't even give their workers bathroom breaks and they have to just continue working. Yeah, that's not good. That's not what a lot of companies do, but there are some companies that are horrible. Personally, at our company, it really does. It's very much, are you getting your work done? And if you're getting your work done, nobody really cares what you're doing. I would, if I wanted to, I'd get up, go for a walk, go to attend a class that the company was holding. Oftentimes they do that. They had their innovation garage where they'd have networking events and they would have basically, what do you call it? These little lessons regarding agile methodology, which is its own thing. So it wasn't like stay at your desk the entire time and do work, but some companies have managers that micromanage hard and do push that. But again, so I've not found the work too different from home and from the workplace, at least for me. Like work on your computer, get up, walk around a bit. The only difference is at home I'm comfortable, and in the workplace I'm in weird. I'm not. That's really the only difference I've found.
Yeah, my experience has been a lot like Haf's, and like it is a lot the company culture. So like for example at J&J, there's really no one's telling you like where to go, like where to sit, like how to do your work. It's all up to you. There's no one's like, this is kind of a misconception I had like before I started work. Like I thought I was gonna have to like clock in and clock out, and that's definitely not the case. Like they don't check that you're even doing the 8 hours. Like there's kind of just like a trust that you're doing your work, you're getting it done. If you want to get up and walk around, you can definitely do that. There's like kind of like how this company has like lunch and learns where you go and like learn different things in lunch. There's employee resource groups that are kind of like clubs at work for like different like it could be by ethnicity, it could be by just like special interests, whatever. So there's like a lot of different like activities and stuff on like campus for work as well. We have like a running club. So it's not necessarily like a rigid, sit in your cubicle 8 hours. There's a lot of different other things that you're expected to also just get involved in. Doesn't necessarily have to be just your work. So yeah, it's definitely not just like rigid work.
Yeah, I think so. When I was interning with CARE, it was a little different. I think it was a lot easier to communicate and to get stuff done because there was a certain expectation that I had to get like meet certain things by certain deadlines. And I couldn't meet those until I got approval and he updated and checked, okay, this is what the flyer looks like. What do you think of this marketing plan? And it was kind of like a whole process where we had to continuously get updates and I had to continuously like get approval from him. from the executive director. So it was a lot more difficult to get everything done when it was online. But when it was in person, he was literally a couple steps away. I could literally bring it to his desk and say, hey, how does this look? Great. No, you need me to change this. I'll change this right now. I think while I was sitting there and actually doing the work, it wasn't like consistently like, hey, what's going on? Like, what's up? Like checking. It was more like I would update him when I did have an update. We took the breaks. He would tell us, okay. And since I worked for a Muslim organization, he'd be like, okay, it's time for Salah. So he would kind of stop and be like, if you guys want to pray, we're going to go pray in this room. And it was a really small group. So it was really nice. But there's always like certain things where you're not really, no one's really breathing down your neck, but there's an expectation that you have to make sure that you meet it. And as long as you're meeting the deadlines and meeting what needs to be done, it's not a lot of like pressure on you, alhamdulillah. So that was nice.
All right. Let's take an in-person question if anyone has one.
I have one.
Okay.
Go for it.
When coworkers invite you out for like lunch or drinks and stuff, how do you handle that?
Ooh, I have a story. Okay. All right. So with CARE, when I first got invited.
You work for a Muslim organization.
Yes,
this shouldn't be an issue for you.
No, this was actually really funny. I hadn't even had my first day yet. I was starting a couple like weeks after. But he was like, yeah, like let's do a dinner at my house. So you can meet all of the past interns and the executive board and everyone that works here before you actually work at the company. And it was like very stressful. And I was like a little nervous because I didn't really know anybody else. And I was like, I'm going to go to this random guy's house that I have only met online. But I went anyway, because I was like, I might as well. I got to meet the people. And this is probably the best time that I can meet everyone in the past and meet the people that did my job in the past couple semesters. So I did go. But again, it was a Muslim organization. So it was all Muslims. And of course, there was no, it wasn't going out for a drink, but instead for a cute little dinner, and his grandmother made tea. So it was really nice. It's a much smaller organization, but I've had instances in other jobs where it was someone was like, hey, are you comfortable? Do you want to go out for a drink, or you want to go out meet at a bar? And those types of times I would always be like, I'd love to go out for lunch, maybe during the day, but I don't think I can go out to kind of put a limit on how far you would go. And you set the boundaries from the beginning. So that's definitely what I tried to do as soon as I could.
Yeah, I think setting the boundaries in the beginning is really important, because this was also something that I was kind of shocked in my first co-op, that there's a really big part of networking, I guess, and making connections is via happy hour after work or something like that. And especially I found a lot of other the co-ops, that's how a lot of them connected. I'd be sitting with them and all they'd be talking about is alcohol, and it was, you can't really get involved in those kinds of conversations. But if you kind of set the boundaries at the beginning, saying, yeah, we can go out, but we're not going to go to a bar, or I'd be love to hang out with you guys, but at a lunch. And also I try not to go out separate from the office, alone with, let's say, a man. If we're gonna go out, we're gonna go out as a group, that kind of thing.
Yeah, it definitely is kind of the boundaries that you set in that regard. And you kind of do have to participate socially at your company to an extent if you want to advance. As much as I'm personally much more partial to putting my head down and working, you're not going to get noticed that way. You need to make those connections. You need to attend these events sometimes. And it's not always comfortable. And different people are comfortable with different things. Some people are comfortable going to bars and then not drinking. I personally wouldn't be with that. It's not, and I'm not even saying this from a halal haram perspective. I'm saying this from just a personal, it's not a comfortable thing at all. But people in the workplace have a really high fixation with alcohol. They love it for some reason. It's all the time. They bring it to any event possible. And it's just something you basically have to, it's your limit. You don't go past it. And I guess it's based on your comfort level. It's what it comes down to.
Yeah. Also, kind of a workaround I found is if they want to plan, let's say your team wants to plan an event, take charge of planning that event. So you make sure that it's set in a way that makes you comfortable as well. So for example, like one of our team members was going to retire, so we were going to have a retirement party. Some of them were talking about having it at a bar. I said I'd plan it, and we did it at a nice restaurant instead. So, you can kind of, I mean, that doesn't always work, of course, but like there are times where like, yeah, maybe you can kind of like take the initiative and, sort of make it to your advantage.
Let's see. Fnan, we don't drink whiskey, we
you.
do Zamzam instead. Ali, you said you had a story to share.
Sure, I don't mind sharing. So there was during my hiring event, they brought us all out, all of the potential hires, to kind of like a bar, right? And I was they flew us out to somewhere, so I really didn't have anywhere else to go. We're kind of stuck at the hotel, so I had to participate. Obviously, I didn't drink, but I kind of just sat to the side. The VP of HR, who was responsible for the entire event, got really, really drunk, right? And I guess maybe it slipped his mind that he had a speech afterwards, because he went up there and accidentally or inadvertently said, by the way, you guys are all getting hired. This is just a formality. And I don't think anyone realized, because they were equally as drunk, but that rest of the interview process, I basically coasted, because like it wasn't even a matter of being nervous anymore. It was just, I almost have a guarantee that whatever you do, you're basically already fine. So this doesn't really help anyone, just a humorous account, but it pays off not to be part of that culture. I'll just say that.
I do want to mention, though, I think we answered the question pretty well. I want to mention, though, that you need to know yourself and how comfortable, and basically how much you need to know your own boundaries. So if you're someone who's like liable to like follow peer pressure, you need to stay away from those situations. Like you need to make sure your priorities are straight there. Like if you're someone who, when everyone's drinking, you feel like I want to join in, you need to make sure that you have either maybe someone to keep you on track, or that you're a bit of distance away from that. Because it's easy to fall into peer pressure, and it's easy to basically go down tracks you don't want to go down. So that's just something to keep in mind. Okay.
I have a follow-up question. Sorry, no, Amar, you can go first. Sorry.
No, it's okay. You
Now, are people allowed to bring like alcoholic beverages into the office?
I don't think so.
Yeah, I think. Oh,
Okay.
sorry. Sorry, I was gonna say I think it depends on the workplace, because like if you work in a smaller, more casual company, then it might be allowed like after work hours. But in most like large corporate companies, that's kind of a no-no. So you'll kind of see it that way.
Okay, thank you. I'm done now.
I mean,
Amar, you can go.
I'm pretty sure it's frowned upon in most situations, but they do sometimes still bring it. Like the company will bring it in for some events. I've seen it happen. Again, they love alcohol. It's a weird fixation, but it's a fixation nonetheless. Let's see, Hassan, you have a question? If you're speaking, we can't hear you.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, and yes.
Okay. So I have a question. So on the application, when you fill it out, can you just say you don't want to be associated near alcohol?
I wouldn't, because first of all, there's not really a slot for that. Is like, what's your alcohol preference? And second, if you're among hundreds of applications and yours is weird or has things maybe you don't want to deal with, that's gonna kind of ruin your chances a tad. Rather, I would just try to stick to your guns when you're in there, because they're not gonna fire you for not going to a bar. Most places won't. Some crazy places might,
You
but
probably don't want to work there if they're like that.
yeah, that is a pretty good point. Like if again, some cultures are just not compatible with some people. Like some places are just toxic. You're better off not working there if possible. But I would not indicate on the application, unless prompted, your alcohol preference, or rather lack of. Okay. Yes, Sam, do you have a question?
I do have a question, but I want each panelist to answer it individually, I suppose. So as you guys know, right, the whole reason this thing exists is because we have now virtual internships and virtual jobs. I kind of want to know, when you guys started college and your careers, were you expecting to be on the site? Like, I understand virtual wasn't a thing at the time, but has your, I guess, uh, love for your field, has it changed, grown, or diminished because of virtual? And why?
So your question is, do you like your field more or less virtually?
Sort of, but I guess the follow-up question that I'm not asking is, would you have gone into your field had you known this would be the outcome, or would you have picked something else?
All right, so I guess I'll answer it. Yes, absolutely yes. Probably would have wanted it even more if I'd known this was the case. It was working from home was already a thing, but it was a fringe thing. It was maybe once a week, twice a week kind of deal in our field. It wasn't something that was available to us as interns, but it was available to some of the full timers. So it wasn't alien, and we knew it existed. But definitely, at least my field, which is computer science, software engineering, took no hits during the pandemic. Like, we just transitioned to in person to online like seamlessly. It worked out very much in our favor.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say if I knew that this would be like 100% virtual, that I probably wouldn't. I wouldn't have gone into my major necessarily, but it would definitely like impact the way I see like my career going like in the future. Like I said, I couldn't go do any of the lab work anymore because of the virtual nature of the job. Like, it changed. And so my responsibilities and the projects I worked on changed just to accommodate that. And while I still enjoyed it, I really like it. I do still kind of want at one point to be able to do some more lab work or do something more like in person with like patients and customers. So that's not necessarily something I want like long term forever. And like had that been, I guess, the like requirement for this, job, for this major, then I probably wouldn't take it.
I'm kind of with you on that. I think I like the people person aspect of it, of working in a situation in any position. I don't think I would be able to enjoy my major as much as I do without being able to interact with everybody around me, without being able to connect with clients, with other employees, with anybody else around me. I think it would have changed my decision to a certain extent, because I like being creative and a lot of it's online already, but I know to a certain extent it has to be presented in person. So I think it might have changed my decision, maybe just instead of marketing to go to communication, because that's more online than it is actually having a discussion and designing something together. So it wouldn't have changed it drastically, I don't think.
Thank you.
Of course. All right. So 10 seconds for another in-person question before we move on to another stock one.
I got another question. So I know it's weird, right? But the little I know about company cultures, right? There's a lot of, I guess that's not the best word, but I want to say gambling, right? Right, gambling in the sense that you guys would like bet on sports teams or bet on stock markets or whatever it may be, right? Just so as we'll put money here, we'll take each other out to lunch, and that's something virtually you can still gamble, maybe without the dinner or not as much. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, when you have your conversations with your peers over Microsoft Teams or Skype or WebEx or whatever the platform is there that element? Is it still there, or is it more like, I guess, rigid and professional?
So if I understand correctly, your question is the casualness of conversation still there, or has it become more rigid and professional online?
Yes, but I guess the part I really care about is, like, I've heard stories that you go to work and every Friday night you guys have to go and bet on horses or bet on something else like sport teams or whatever it might be. So of course that would vary from field to field. And now that we introduced the element of virtualness, I guess, is that a thing? Have you guys come across that?
I mean, I'd say I haven't even come across that when I was working in person either. I feel like in a sense you kind of establish yourself as like, what are the things that you would be willing to talk about? What do you not talk about? What do you actually engage in? And what do you don't? So if those conversations did happen, like I never like participated in it. I haven't really been like exposed to it. And so online, that's not a thing either. But I would say that that casualness of conversation is still there. So like whatever in person, if we were starting a meeting in person, we kind of just, ask each other about, what are your plans for the weekend? How is, like if there's like a personal, story that you've heard from this team member before and you like bring it up again, like how was working on your boat going or different things like that, right? That's still there online. It just kind of depends on how you and your team try to keep that culture like engaged.
The tricky part really happens with people who aren't on your team. That's where basically the relationship kind of dies off. If you're not dealing with them on a daily basis, you're not going to see them. I interned with one of my friends once, one of the virtual sessions, and we barely just didn't communicate at all throughout the entirety of the internship. We were on separate teams, and we're friends from outside of work. So within work, we just didn't see each other because it was virtual. Once or twice we did, but most of the time we didn't. But in terms of gambling on horses, we never did that beforehand either. Now, caged dogfights, however, we didn't do that either. It's somewhat of I think that's kind of a fringe thing. They do still do happy hours though at my workplace. So those like meetups they just do them. They do them like virtually, and they use like Jackbox games instead. So like I don't know how many of you have played Quiplash before. They put the family friendly filter on, so it's not as fun, but it still works.
Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate in most environments. I think once you set those boundaries in the beginning, and you kind of showcase yourself as I'm not going to participate in really anything that goes against the beliefs that I've set forward already. People don't really engage you in that type of stuff. So alhamdulillah, I haven't had any situation where I've been talked about or I've spoken about that type of stuff before. I know within my major, especially because of my focus with international business, there have been a lot of stories where immediately the discussion, especially depending on the country that you would be visiting or traveling to, you have to focus on the culture as well to make sure that you're adapting to the people, the consumer, the client, and make sure that you meet their needs as well. And I think that's where it would become a little bit more difficult because that's when you have to set the boundaries, but without being disrespectful to the person. So those are the situations that I think I would be on the most lookout for. Alhamdulillah, I haven't had any situations where I've had to worry too much about that. But otherwise, like I said, I think setting your boundaries is the most important step in taking to make sure that doesn't get as far as it should, to get any farther than it should.
As kind of a story about like setting boundaries, this actually might kind of be related to one of our previous questions. In my like first co-op, I never like necessarily said I don't shake hands or whatever. I kind of just like avoided it in general, but I never like set that boundary. And like on my last day there, as I was leaving, one of my coworkers, he comes up and he hugs me. He's just like, I'm gonna miss you, Newt. And I was so uncomfortable. And I was like, okay, definitely from the beginning, like you have to say something that, you don't want like random people touching you. I think now, thanks to COVID, this might not be an issue anymore, but it is just like important to set boundaries. You don't want to be like in an uncomfortable situation.
Thank you. I have one more question. If I may, if somebody else wants to take it, I've already eaten the floor for 2 questions. So
Yeah, hold on. Does anyone else have a question beforehand? Give it 10
Let's
seconds.
say, for example, a time of Dhuhr has came up and you want to go to pray Dhuhr, but it's the time of your shift. What should you do?
So generally, well, like again, this really depends on what type of job you have. So let's say I've worked in a corporate setting, and I've also worked in the library before when I had an actual shift that had to deal with people. So in a corporate setting, you just walk off to the break room for around a few minutes, you pray, you go back. If you can't find a break room, you steal a meeting room for a bit. There's rooms you can find. There's some empty space you can find without too much trouble. In like a minimum wage job, for example, where you're servicing customers and you have to do it, usually you will have someone with you. You're not usually alone, and you can step away for a couple minutes to a corner, a storage room, or behind a wall somewhere and pray. What I used to do was I would work 7-hour shifts at the library on Saturday, and I would get a mandatory half-hour break in those 7 hours, which I hated. But I would basically position the break towards the end of Dhuhr and the beginning of Asr. So I could pray Dhuhr, wait 10 minutes, and then pray Asr, and then go back. But when I couldn't do that, I would ask my partner, hey, I need to go back and pray for a second. I'll be back in a couple minutes. It's basically the same as if you had to use the restroom, but just a little bit longer than that.
Yeah, I'd say this is also one of those like kind of like first week on the job, like what you discuss with your manager. Say that, I have to pray like, I don't know, I guess like 3 of the prayers kind of coincide or 2 of the prayers coincide with like my work hours. I'm gonna just, have to go out a couple minutes. Like I need a place to pray. Talk about, if Salta Juma, if you're also working on Fridays, say like, hey, I'm gonna need this time off, just like, an hour or half hour, however long it'll take you to get to the masjid and back, and depending on the khutbah. So if something's important to you, that's something you should definitely discuss with your manager in the like first week of your job when you first meet.
Yeah, 100% with you. I think it's important as soon as you like when you're discussing like your schedule and everything that needs to be done, you can have that discussion where you need to set that again kind of like boundary and make sure that everyone knows like this is what I got to do. This isn't really a give or take. I have to take this break. And if not, position your break like Hafiz said. I think that works a lot of times in certain jobs. That works out pretty well.
Don't indicate that on your application though.
Don't do that.
Again,
unfortunately, yes, it can affect your employment.
It absolutely will.
Huh.
Definitely, like again, there are some companies that might fire you if you need to take that break, but that is absolutely not a company you want to work for. That's just going to be a toxic culture for you, and you also have like a discrimination lawsuit on your hands there. So maybe make some money right off of it.
A plug from right there. Contact CARE if that happens, y'all. Inshallah it does. But if anything happens, contact CARE. They got your back.
Yeah, it's but again, most of the time, at least in New Jersey, it doesn't happen. Because it's like again, our needs are not for Salah are honestly very minor. About 3 feet and 3 minutes is really all you need. Well, 4 minutes if it's a 4 rakah Salah. But so most people won't begrudge you that, and if they do, they're probably racist. That's probably what it is, and you go to HR for that, and then they basically get rid of them for you. Point is, like, you can get what you need. You can get your Salah in. Does that answer your question, Barak?
Yeah, it does. Thank you so much.
All right, Amir, you have a question?
Yeah, this is a pretty straightforward one. Do you guys know of any salary differences with virtual and in person? As in, you used to get paid more in person. Now there's like a drop for your same field for people graduating through a virtual climate, so to speak.
Don't give them the idea. Shh. I've not heard of it. I've not heard of it, but I can see it happening. I can definitely see it happening. For people already in the field, maybe not, but well, seeing as things are going back to normal now, unless we deal with a second wave, this will probably fade away, most likely. But I have not seen a salary difference, no.
Yeah, I haven't heard of that either. I mean, the only thing I would think that you would lose is like if they normally offer like relocation assistance, they're not going to do that anymore because you're not relocating, you're working from home. Some people do get like commuter reimbursement. I know people like lost that because they're not commuting anymore. So like I think just like side benefits you might like lose, but I haven't heard of anything about salary difference. And that would be really ridiculous if you're doing the same job.
There's commuter reimbursement?
Some companies have that.
Which
like
one?
you have to for J&J, if you live over 50 miles away, I live 49 miles, so I can't get commuter reimbursement.
Oh man.
I'm like, maybe I should just move a mile away. But like, yeah, some companies have that. But like you have to live like 50 miles is pretty far. That's like a really long drive.
That occurred to my first internship as well, because they would give housing to the interns if you lived 50 miles away, and I lived like 40 away. So it's like, oh, okay, it's still the drive, but without the housing.
Yeah, so I think it's like side benefits like that, like housing assistance, relocation, things like that.
All right.
No, I got to agree. I think with with my position, they actually, I think it was only just because of the fact that it was COVID at the time, but they stopped paying their interns. They had a whole thing where if you worked a certain amount of hours and you met that by the end of the semester, you would get paid like a lump sum instead of hourly. They took that out for a couple semesters. So unfortunately, at the time that I worked, it wasn't a thing anymore. So I believe that they have reinstated that after they were able to get funding back. But at the time, but I think that's separate just from the fact that it was online, because we still were going in person, but they just didn't have the funds for that. So I think with internships, it might have been affected, because I know a lot of other internships did the same thing where they were going to pay students and they stopped. But in terms of jobs, I haven't seen a drastic difference.
I was gonna suggest that if they stopped paying you, you should have gone to care, but it doesn't really work in this situation.
Unfortunately not. No, but I was notified of that from the moment like I started the interview. So I was told before even actually they sent out a whole thing. They were like, yes, I'm sorry. You know, like I know you applied thinking that there was going to be a payment, but you can't. So
The only thing I can see happening with that is like if the salary was inflated for like a city tax or something like that, like New York City jobs are inflated because you have to pay such high taxes on them. So I can see how some companies might, if you're not working in the city, you don't have to pay that city tax. They would adjust, but I personally haven't seen it, but I can see that being a scenario.
Thank you.
Okay, so this is a good question. If you finish your work early, should you just chill out, or do you let your boss know?
I would say that like while it's easy to just like kind of chill out, like you know, you've met your expectations. If anyone asks you, yeah, you did your job. But if you actually really want to, you know, get higher up and like really notice, it's really important to seek out more work. One like story that kind of comes to mind is in the beginning of my co-op, I had like finished all the work they gave me and I just had like literally nothing else to do. I even did like extra trainings. I just had nothing else to do. So I had like a sticky note on my desk saying like, ask my manager for more work. Like just kind of like a reminder for myself to like go ask him next time I see him free. And like he had stopped by my desk and saw that and like was really impressed. Like, oh, like she's literally trying to get more work and she even has like a little reminder to do that. And like ever since then, like my relationship with my manager has been really good because he knows that I'm like very proactive about asking for work. So I mean, no one's gonna stop you, especially virtually. Like if you finish your work and you just want to stop working, no one's going to know and no one's going to like penalize you for it. But like, you know, in these kind of experiences, internships, your first job, like you want to get ahead and like really stand out. So I would recommend not chilling out.
I really guess what it comes down to is like a lot of what Nuda said is correct. If you want to get ahead and if you want to stick out, you need to like you want to show that you're putting in work. And I guess what's important is you want to show it. So you know how Islamically when you do a good deed, you're supposed to put your head down and not really show up too much, show off about it and just do it for Allah. Yeah, don't do that in the workplace. In the workplace, you want to make sure everyone knows what you're doing. Not in a show off kind of way, but if no one knows, then it's not going to help you. Again, you're working, you should tell your supervisor what you're doing. And it's not hard to do, like because when I meet with my manager, I have a one-on-one every month or every 2 weeks. We talk about what have you been doing, what work have you taken up, so on and so forth. And I ask my supervisor for side projects, so he literally knows what I'm doing in that regard. But that definitely does help you get forward. And again, sometimes if you finished all your work, you can afford to take a little bit of time, you can afford to like, you know, relax a little bit, but definitely don't be like, okay, you finished your work 2 days early, take the next 2 days off. Or first of all, if you're doing that, you're kind of phenomenal. Second of all, yeah, see, that's too much. And definitely don't show people if you're relaxing because it looks like you're slacking. Even if you finished your work, even if you're doing more than them, it's a bad look. It's not an appearance you want to have. Ali has linked his LinkedIn post regarding this topic, so do check that out if you'd like. Amir said, chill out with your boss. Definitely socializing with your boss is a good move. It'll definitely get you closer. It'll make him, like, again, communicate with your boss, talk to your boss. Your boss is there to help you, ideally, to help you get ahead, to help you to advance. Unless he's a terrible boss, in which case he'll be your worst enemy, and I feel sorry for you. But most, I think, bosses, if you can basically be their friend, you'll be basically be in a much better position going forward.
Yeah, I think with if you're done with your work, definitely try to get more to advance yourself as best you can, but also be aware of like if you're getting this work done super early, then of course like you have the time to get more work done for the company. But if you're getting your work done like a little bit and you continuously ask for more, there might be an extent where you might be asked to do too much, where it's going to become like too much on your plate. And there was an instance where that happened, and I was like telling him, like, yeah, telling the executive director, like, I had some time, let me take charge of something else, some other project. And what he gave me was something that I definitely could not finish on my own. So like I let him know that, even though I told him I was free to do as much work as I could, I completed as much as I could. There definitely wasn't enough time for me to get everything done that he was assigning me. So I asked for help from the rest of the group.
Okay, so we are coming towards the conclusion of the event soon. So we might have time for a handful more questions. So does anyone have an in-person one? Okay, so I do have another one here. Do you get paid extra for working more than 40 hours? No. So this kind of depends on whether you're salaried or hourly. And the difference between that is if you're hourly, you're getting paid per hour that you work. And if every hour after 40 is overtime, and you're going to be paid, not only are you going to be paid more, you're going to be paid 150% of what you would be paid regularly. So if you're making $10 an hour, you're going to be making 15 overtime. So overtime is lit. When my first internship, they actually capped overtime at 45 hours, at 5 extra hours per week, because you'd make so much more money. Because otherwise I would have worked like, and I tried to get the 45 every single week, just because it was so much more. It was hundreds of dollars more every week because of that. And then they realized, oh, we have 40 interns, we're cutting overtime for everybody. And this year after that, there was no overtime available because they realized how much it was. So definitely, if you want to make money, go for overtime. As a salaried employee, no, you're basically getting your salary. It's the same amount. It doesn't matter how much you work in that period of time. Like it doesn't matter if you you get paid time off in a salaried position where you just don't show up and they pay you for it. Now, different companies give you different amounts of it. Some people will give you good paid time off. That's your vacation days. And some people just won't. Won't be too much, but most people will. So that's really the difference there. It's if you're salaried, no, you're not going to be paid extra per extra time you work, which sucks. But if you don't work but look like you're working, you will still get paid. Like you're getting paid the same amount regardless of what happens or when you show up. Like if we show up an hour late for work, there's no clocking in, is what I'm saying. Now that might not be the most honest thing to do, but from like a practicality perspective, yeah, there's no clocking in or clocking out.
Yeah, I would say that, yeah, obviously that's absolutely true. If you're salaried, you can't get any more than the 40 hours. But that's why, like, when looking for a job, that's kind of something to think about. Like, if you're in a contracting position, those are usually, yeah, you get the overtime, but you don't get certain other benefits. If you're in like more of like a full-time employee position, then you just have your hourly salary. And that's why, like, if you are in that hourly salary position, like, this is kind of like where work-life balance comes in. Like, you're not making extra money by working like 5 or 6 more hours. So try to like manage your time so you don't have to do that. The company's not going to die without you. It's fine if you stop working at the time that you're supposed to stop working and just call it a day. So that's kind of something to keep in mind. Like, you're not getting paid more and they're really going to be fine without you. So just stop at your hours. Obviously, like, do your work, and like, if you want to work a little bit extra, like, that's fine, but just like know how to balance your life.
First of all, if the company will die without you, leverage that to get a promotion. Like, that is absolutely useful. Secondly, there will be times occasionally where you may have to stick around a little bit if an emergency happens, but that shouldn't be the norm. And if it is, you might be not the best. That definitely warrants the conversation. Something my manager told me early on is we usually expect you to work 8 hours a day. Occasionally, there might be meetings that start a little bit earlier or later. And occasionally, if something goes really wrong, you might be called in on a weekend, but that shouldn't be the norm. And if it becomes the norm, talk to me about it. Now, I really hope the weekend thing doesn't happen because that would suck tremendously. But that's generally how it goes. Question came in regarding hourly. What do you mean there's no clocking in or out? I'm generally confused about how to use my time card. Do I sign in my breaks or my meal times or whatnot? So again, different places have different structures for it. When I was working as an intern, we would put in hours at the end of the day or end of the week, really. I would just keep track of when I came in and when I left. And our manager was like, your lunch hour basically counts as one of the 8 hours you're working. The other intern team's manager told them, no, it doesn't. If you're taking a lunch hour, you're staying an extra hour, basically. Right. So it warrants a conversation with your manager to basically figure that out. A salaried position does not clock in, doesn't keep track of their time. They're assumed to be working 8 hours a day. If you work 6 hours a day and you walk out, if they notice you're not there, that might be an issue. But like, if your work is getting done, most people won't care too much. Again, don't let people see. What I mean is, don't leave work early, but you're not. There's no. What I'm saying is, there's no one keeping track of when you come in and when you leave. If you're salaried.
I think kind of like you were saying, it's really important to establish like what the expectations are with your manager when you first start. Some managers are pretty rigid. They want to see you there the full 8 hours. Like if you're not there at 5 leaving, you know that they're going to start asking questions. Some managers, they say, if you want to work 6 hours today and 10 hours tomorrow, like that's on you. Like you can do whatever you want. Just try to get in your 40 hours. So that's something that you need to establish with your manager in the beginning, you know. I think like just especially like with any job, in that first week is really important to understand all your expectations and for you to give your expectations of the job as well to your manager.
I guess
Yeah.
just
set up from the beginning, and it was like one day we're coming in, the other 2 days you have to work a certain amount of hours, and that was set from the beginning. With my job at the construction company, I kind of work on my own time, and they just have a certain like amount of hours that I'm supposed to clock in, I guess. But it's not really set based on. I just tell them, okay, I've worked this amount of hours this week, and I don't tell them the exact times that I've done it. But as long as my work is getting done, and of course I'm very honest about what I'm doing and how long I'm working for. But I kind of do it on a trust basis as well. So I'm not saying, okay, I clocked in at exactly 7:47 a.m. and I clocked out at this. I'm not doing that, but kind of just telling overall how long I've been working.
Oh,
go ahead.
I was gonna ask a question, but I didn't want to cut you guys off.
Well, it's too late for that.
I can't do it anymore. No, but my question was that, so I heard somebody say, and it kind of made me think about it. But let's say, you know, I'm a salary employee. Do you guys like, does it, you know, put your 40 hours in? So if I come in at like 2 p.m. and work till like 10 p.m. every day, you know, and I get all the work done, and like, you know, nobody's saying anything, is that good practice, bad practice? Does it count against you, for you? How does that work?
It's really based on the workplace, based on your manager. If your manager's like, you can come in at midnight if you want, doesn't matter. Go for it. But I would recommend being visible, definitely wherever you are. So if you're working when no one can see you, it's not going to be helpful to you. Again, you really do want to show the work you do. You want the people in charge to know who you are, to know what you're doing, because that's basically how you get. That's how you get, up there. Being Batman doesn't help you because Batman doesn't show his face. Having a secret, like being a secret do-gooder at work, that's not going to help you advance, because I'm not saying like if you help someone broadcast it, like, yeah, today I helped this person. that's just being a jerk at that point. But you don't want to be like super secretive about the work you do. It doesn't help you.
Yeah, I will say though, if like you're that kind of person who's sending emails at like midnight, everyone just thinks you're a workaholic. They think you're working just like morning till night. But yeah, definitely that's something that like every workplace has their own culture. If the culture is that as long as you're meeting deadlines and you're delivering on your project, then a lot of places really don't care what time you work. If you are coming in at 2, at least they're seeing you at 2. You know, just as long as you're getting your projects done. Most places, I feel like there's more of an emphasis on just like delivering than on like attendance.
I don't think I can add really much because I don't work on salary. Everything's based on hourly. So I'm gonna keep it for them.
She can get overtime.
Thank you.
I miss overtime. It was sweet. It was fantastic. Okay. We'll give 10 seconds for an in-person question.
I have a question.
You only needed 2. Wonderful. Go for it.
Can you finish all the work? Like I know in computer science, when you're given a project that like makes you learn new technologies, you'll need to take a lot of time to learn these new technologies. So my question is, can you finish your work with the time you're given for an in-person job while the time you're in the office, or do you actually need to understand the technology while you're at home and then learn it and then practice it and then do some of the work at home, then come back and then finish up the project right there?
Okay, so specifically for computer science, for software engineering, the way it's set up is in sprints. And a sprint is basically a 2-week period where you basically have a whole bunch of stories, which are tasks. And every story is given a number of points, which is how difficult it is. The way those points are set up are based on you and your ability. So when your product owner or your project manager is setting up these stories, you're going to be there. And he's going to be like, how long do you think this would take you? And based on your knowledge, you give an estimation of that. So that's generally how it's set. Now, there are some periods of time where it gets crunched, and you have to basically you're going to be in a bit of a time crunch to get the work done. You won't be able to work at exactly your comfort. Usually, I recommend not working from home. And now, like once work hours are done, don't work outside of them if you can avoid it, just because it kind of messes with your work-life balance at that point. And generally, the general expectation shouldn't be that you're doing that. Again, difference from company to company. Got to set those expectations early on. Some companies are very much have terrible culture. I don't know if you've heard of gaming companies. Terrible places to work. Absolutely horrible. The conditions are tremendously terrible. The pay is not that great. They have something called crunch time, where you basically have you work like around the clock for minimal pay. For no extra pay rather. So again, different industries, different companies have different cultures. You want to figure that out. But generally, I would say no, you're not expected to be learning from home. You come in the workplace, you put in your 8 hours. You go home, you do whatever you like doing there. Generally, it's sleeping for me, but different people do stuff when they go home.
Makes sense.
All right. Does that answer your question, Bada?
Yeah, it does. It does.
Fantastic. Okay, we'll give 10 seconds for another in-person question. And this is going to be the last small handful of questions, so maybe only 1 or 2 more. Six, 2. Okay, so a question that came in was, okay, I'm not going to read that one. What happens if you don't meet a deadline? Well, why do you think they call it a deadline?
I can take this question. So I think before you reach a deadline, you kind of know if you're going to make it or not. And if you're really absolutely sure that you're not going to make that deadline, you have to communicate this to your manager or whoever the stakeholder is for that deadline, because depending on what the project is or whatever it is, there might be some like consequences, or there might be a way to like mitigate the consequences of missing that deadline. So the earlier you realize that you cannot make a deadline, that's when you should definitely communicate it. If you wait till after the deadline, like it's a day that something's due and you come to your manager, you tell them like, hey, I definitely can't get this done by today, that's going to be a really bad look for you. But if you come right before, not like right before, you come like in advance and you say like, look, I don't think it's practical, look, we're not going to make this deadline, then you're going to be fine. They understand that they're like, I like, it's happened to me before where I was like, I'm definitely not gonna make this deadline, it's just not possible. It's not something crazy. You're not the first person to not be able to like make a deadline, but if you tell them enough in advance, it looks really good for you that you are proactive and that you're actually keeping track of your work, and you're like, hey, no, like I know how this is going to play out. But if you wait till the end, it's going to be really bad.
Yeah, like again, a healthy workplace, then don't expect you to be perfect. And you can't be perfect. Occasionally you're going to miss a deadline. But it's really how you handle it. So if every week you're missing your deadlines and not communicating it, you're going to get fired. Like, because you're not learning from your mistakes, you're not advancing, you're not helping them mitigate. If you're usually working and then you communicate from the beginning, hey, this is too much, it's not going to get done, and you're very clear about that, it's a little bit easier. And some places are unreasonable. Some places, they might fire you for missing a single deadline. Usually these are extremes. Most places, they're not going to just like fire an employee. That's kind of expensive to do, by the way, because there's a training period and replacing you is not easiest thing in the world. So as long as you provide enough value that firing you isn't worth it, you're usually going to be fine. If the point is, if you're so nonchalant about it and just absolutely lazy and just let it pass every time for no good reason, that's going to be an issue. That is absolutely going to be an issue, because they're going to be like, hey, this is like week 65 of this. Why? And you're not going to have a good answer. Unless you're really good at talking your way out of situations, in which case, go ahead.
No, don't go ahead. But
No.
Anyway, I think there's also certain instances where you're also like working on setting the specific deadline with your boss. So like there'll be a certain job that you need to get done, and you'll work with them and be like, okay, well, you need to get this done within about this range of time. What day do you think you can get it done by? As long as you're communicating as well based on the amount of work that you're seeing, you can communicate an extra couple days, a little bit of an extension, say, okay, I can't really get it done by this time, but I have enough time to get it done by this day. And if in the case that you don't think that you can make it again, like everyone else has been saying, as long as you communicate with your boss as best you can, communication is 100% key. If you don't communicate with your boss or the person that you are supposed to be working for, there's going to be major problems, because that lack of communication is going to cause everything to spiral kind of out of control, and you're not going to know exactly what's happening, what you need to get done, when it needs to be done by. So that communication is key. But as long as you have that kind of relationship where you can talk to the person, that's the biggest thing that'll help you overcome if you do miss a deadline. And inshallah, no one really misses anything that's too important. So.
Yeah, also like I think it really helps if you like come to the table with a solution. Like you're like, hey, I'm not gonna be able to make a deadline, but like we could probably do this or this instead. That does like make the situation seem like very much not a big deal. You say like, oh, we're gonna miss this deadline, but this is this, and then like, oh yeah, okay, that's fine. Like you have a plan, like we know what's happening. You're not just like, here's a problem, deal with it.
That's very true. It's a good point.
Okay, so I think we have time for one more in-person question, if there are any. And if no one has any, then we will conclude.
Hafid, you mentioned something about training. Do I expect when I apply to companies that they will train me, or does it differ from company to another?
That depends. Is it a good company?
I don't know. I'm just asking in general.
So, okay. Generally, yes, there's going to be some level of training, and it's usually not too formal. So what I'm saying is they're not going to teach you how to code, is what I'm saying.
Mhm.
You need to come in knowing how to do that, or rather knowing how to learn how to do that. So for example, you will be assigned to do things you don't know how to do. That's normal. But you need to know how to learn to do those things, or at least in the software field. I'm really not sure about other fields too much, but in software development, it really does come down to also communicating with your coworkers and reaching out to the ones who know what they're doing. Because usually when if I need an explanation of a product, I'll go to the person who developed it last. And I'll be like, hey, you worked on this last. No one else in the company knows what they're doing about it. Can you give me some advice? We call them SMEs, subject matter experts. Sometimes you just literally see the last person who like committed to the project and track them down. And if they're not working at the company anymore, you track down the next person. So that's kind of what you're expected to do. You're kind of expected to find the people who are going to show you what to do, or figure it out yourself. Now, in some instances, yes, there absolutely is some level of training. There definitely was when I started at Optum. They explained how the systems work. I'll be honest, I forgot most of it. And right now they started a 2-week boot camp after I got there. So I'm thinking I messed up in a big way, and that's why they implemented the boot camp for the next hires. That's the theory we have. Hopefully it's not true. So some places, yes, there'll be more formal training. Some places kind of expect you to find your own. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. Appreciate it,
Yeah.
Haf. Thank you.
Yeah, I completely agree with Hoff. And even like in engineering, it's the same thing. It's kind of just like you have to know who to talk to, be proactive about it. And depending on like your job, yeah, there are some things that you're going to definitely need training on, just like the nature of the job. Like if I'm in a lab, they need to train me how to use the equipment. But if it's a lot more documentation based, maybe they just kind of direct me to what procedures to look at, and then I can figure out the rest, and then you talk to the SMEs.
Yeah, for me, it was a lot of all system based. So I was always, the first day of the job, like I was taught exactly how to use the system that they use. What are the best operations that they have in place? How does everyone contact each other? If anything happens, where do I send the email? Like, who do I forward all of the stuff that I've completed to? So those like basic things. That training kind of happens on the first week-ish. And you're also informed of who you need to reach out to, what's happening here. But most of it in general is system-based, and everything else you kind of figure out based on the fact that you are working there with your position. So you should have a bit of background based on what you're doing.
All right. So we are now out of time. That does conclude our event. So I want to thank everyone for attending. I really hope you've benefited from the first career crew panel. This was a topic that we asked a few people about, and they seemed very interested. And I think it's very relevant. So definitely follow MSA on social media to basically keep up with when the next events are happening. Because if this has good feedback, it might be repeated for another topic. One topic we were considering, for example, was religiosity in the workplace. We went into that a little bit today, but more like how to pray in the workplace, how to get Jummah in the workplace. We're going to talk about alcohol there, but we kind of covered that here, so on and so forth. So definitely keep track, keep up with it. And if it's coming up, you'll definitely be able to see. And with that, thank you everyone for attending. That concludes our event.